Hey there, what is up everybody? My name is Nick and I am a super nice guy. But I think you already knew that. Today I'm going to be walking through how I create one of those cool little buttons that when you click it, a little spinning animation occurs and then a check mark animates in. I'm going to be doing all this inside Figma and setting it up as an interactive component and animating it with Smart Animate. And one cool thing to note about this button specifically is that it will actually directly relate to Jakob Nielson's first usability heuristic principle, and that is visibility of system status. Specifically, it says the design should always keep users informed about what is going on through appropriate feedback within a reasonable amount of time. So if the user clicks on a button, they are seeing that the app is working. When they see this animation, the app is thinking, processing, and then when the process is finished, it will present the check mark and the user knows the system status has changed to success. All right, but enough about all this stuff, this backstory. Let's actually get into how we make the thing. Cool, so jumping on into Figma, what we're gonna want to do is, let's start by creating a mobile screen. We're just gonna pretend we're gonna have these on an iPhone 13 mini. I just like to work at 375 by 812. So next we're going to just draw out this button here because I know I'm gonna want it to be about 32 pixels from the edge. So I want 32 padding from the left and the right. And we're just gonna say maybe 64 from the bottom is where this button's gonna live. Okay, cool, so that will be our button size. Now let's just pull it off that canvas for a second because we don't need to go that far forward. I'm gonna start stylizing this. The way I'm gonna set it up is actually not with auto layout because the way we're going to be smart animating elements inside there, they won't actually work with having auto layout set up around an element. We'll actually need multiple elements stacked on top of one frame or one background color. So that's what we'll do here. Let's actually make the height 48 and start stylizing this. So I'm just gonna use a purple, and actually let's crank up that border radius to make this more of a pill shape because that's gonna work better with the animation of the check mark and the two ends coming together. Cool, so really for this to work, we need three things. We need the text layer, we need the loading animation, and we need the check mark icon. So let's start by making a little text and just saying, let's just call it confirm. And we'll just center that. I have mine at 14 point text size and like a -3 letter spacing just to add my own little touch to it. All right, and then next we're going to need the loading animation. This is going to be done with creating an oval. We're gonna wanna make it 24 pixels, 24 by 24. Then we're gonna hit Shift X with that element selected and it will flip the fill into the stroke. And let's just make this black here. Let's also make it a 2 pixel stroke. Actually, what I'm gonna do here is press 0 on this layer and just hide it for now, or Command Shift H and just turn it off in the layers panel. We're gonna put this on the button so we can see what it kind of looks like, what we're working with here, and get a better sense of it. So now what we can do is drag down one of this little button that appears, this little knob, make something like this. Really, we just want to open this up a little bit because we're going to delete some points here, and this makes it a little easier. So now if we double click into the actual shape, let's just start deleting things, maybe like that. We want to just delete a few endpoints so we have this opening here. And then we'll go into the options, there it is. Click on this roundness here just to make it look a little bit more official, more intentional, rounded stroke ends. So now that's it. The beauty of this simplified approach, it doesn't look as polished as say animating this in After Effects or what have you, where you produce an actual loading animation, but this does give you the ability to add this right into your prototype and communicate to developers that this will be that loading button that everyone is talking about, and they will know how it should work. With this sort of carved out, we're going to want to keep all this organized here. We can call this ellipse still, but we're going to press Option Command G. We're going to want to put this in a frame. The frame should be 32 by 32. The ellipse itself is 24 by 24. We're going to need to center that, so I press Option V and H to quickly center that in there. And then we have our 24 by 24 icon inside our 32 by 32 container frame. The container frame we should name loader. Cool, so we still need one more element. Let's just Command-Shift-H on the loader to turn it off. We're going to need a check mark. I mentioned in another video that Google and the material design, they actually now keep all their icons up in Figma in this cool Figma community project file where you can grab anything you need. So we'll just pull that check mark out of there and drop it in here. What's great about this is it's already set up kind of like our loader where it has a 32 by 32 container frame. So for swapping animations and stuff out, it all actually lines up and there won't be any weird jumping from elements as they transition to one another. Cool, so we do have all of our elements now and we can actually just turn them on all to see what we're working with here. This is what we should have. And we're going to select all these in Option Command G and make it a frame, and this will be called button. Then we're just going to want to make sure all this is centered in here. So I'll click each individual element and Option V, Option H to vertical and center them inside there. Option V, Option H, and Option V, Option H. Cool, so now we have everything stacked on top of each other. We have all of our elements to begin making this a component and thinking about how things will animate. Now, all of these should be viewed as a frame or a state in an animation. So this first button will be the first state or frame. The second button will be the second state or frame. And then we have the third button, which will be the check mark, the ending frame. This first one here, we're just going to want the text visible. And so the button should look like this. For the next one, essentially, we're going to want to hide everything except for the loading icon. We'll turn off the check mark and the text. And then for the third one, we're going to want to turn off everything except the check mark. So turn off the loader and turn off the text. All right, so that is the basics of it all. Again, we're thinking about how when we animate from one to the next, what Smart Animate is going to do here. And for those who don't know, the way Smart Animate works is the name of the layers have to be exactly identical, and that's how it matches one layer's transition to the next based on the layer name. So confirm is always confirm in every state here. Loader is always loader, and so on. I don't like having rectangle 1 here because it's this default name here. So I'm going to select all these, press Command R and rename to BG for background. Again, normally buttons are pretty much built with auto layout now in Figma, but for this approach, we kind of have to do it this way, but I think the results are well worth it. Okay, so now for the actual fine-tuning and animating things, how we want these parameters to move. So I'm just gonna pull this text down and create a little label system here. So for this first one, we're going to think in terms of opacity. Opacity is going to be the driving force that will transition different actors on the stage at different points. We can't animate with turning things on and off in the layers panel, but we can animate with opacity that exists over here in the layers panel. And again, there are 3 layers in each one of these buttons, so that's how we're gonna have to think when we're animating these. So for opacity, we have a text layer, we have the loader, and we have the check mark. This text layer, it's going to start at 100% opacity. It's 100% opacity because we want that to be fully visible and nothing else to be visible. So because of that, we can say that the loader will be 0% opacity and the check mark will also be 0% opacity. Then we're going to just copy these over here and do the same thing. So here we just want the loader to be 100% opacity. We want the text layer to animate from the 100% and the previous frame down to 0%, and then we want the check mark to actually stay 0% until this last frame. So we'll just do this one more time for the opacity property, and the loader animation will go from the 100% down to the 0%. The check mark will go from 0% to 100% so that it is fully visible. One way to just quickly visualize this thing here is to just put a little dot for who is the hero of each of these states. So the animation can be sort of visualized in terms of where the opacity is moving through different states. It's going to start fully with the text layer, move to the loader, and then to the check mark. But we do have all these different opacity layers to think about too while we're doing this, but maybe this just makes it easier to understand. Next, we're gonna wanna think about the rotation of this loader. So I'm gonna bring down a couple of these text layers, just alt drag them and call this rotation. The rotation is only gonna exist for the loader. So we have the loader here in one state and then a second state. Those are the only two we need to account for because it's animating out with the opacity and it won't be visible in this last frame. So the loader, it's actually a little bit strange in Figma. We can only animate up to 179.9 degrees and then it resets to 0. It doesn't let you go full 180 and it doesn't let you, similar to After Effects, go to 359 degrees a full rotation. But anyway, we can make this work with 179.9 degrees and then the loader for this will be 0 degrees. So it's going to animate from 179, essentially 180 to 0 degrees. And I'll illustrate that here, what's happening. Here, if we drag this angle, this rotation here, we can see it's going to move and we want it to move clockwise. And so in order for it to move clockwise, it's going to need to start further up counterclockwise. So then when it's visible, it will move clockwise. This first state will be counterclockwise. So then when it animates to this, it's moving clockwise. Here's what I was talking about. It doesn't let you go past 179.9. So if we start at about 178 and we animate to 0, it will move in that direction. Okay, and then the last thing to think about is the scale animation. I think it'll be really nice if the check mark scales up as it fills the shape in this final frame. So it'll be really small and then get bigger. So this can be thought of as scaling from a 0% to a 100%. Now we have everything we need to move on and actually drag these things around so that they will animate properly. Let's jump into this first one here and open up the layers panel. What we have is 2 layers turned off and just 1 turned on. We're actually going to want to turn everything back on because we can't animate a hidden layer. It won't come across. It needs to be opacity. So now looking at the parameters we've spec'd out here, we know that the check mark just needs a 0% opacity, so I'll select that and press 0 twice and opacity is set to 0. Then I know the loader icon that we created needs to be at 179.9 degrees, so I'll type that in here and you can see it moved a little bit. And then the opacity also needs to be 0, so I'll press 0 twice and opacity is set to 0. I believe that button's ready to go. So we'll move to the next state here, the second button, the loader button. And we need to do the same things here. Turn on these other 2 layers. The text layer confirm, we'll press 0 twice to make that opacity 0. The check mark's going to be 0 opacity, but before we do that, we're going to scale this thing down just so we can see before we turn it off what we're actually doing. So if I make it something 6 by 6, it'll be really small and it will get really large. It doesn't quite matter going all the way to 0 because there will be an opacity animation or transition occurring at the same point, so you won't actually see the whole animation. Something really small will work totally fine. So now that we've visualized that, we'll press 0 twice and turn opacity to 0. And then we have to do this one more time here where we will turn on these other 2 layers. Confirm text layer should remain at 0%. The loader animation will go from 100 at the previous layer to 0 here. So 0 twice to turn that to 0 opacity. If you don't like the keyboard shortcut, you can turn the layer opacity down to 0 here as well. Cool, well now all the really hard stuff is done. The prep and the setup is definitely the bulk of the work here. Now we're just gonna let Figma do its magic while we wire these things together into a prototype and make these interactive components. I just wanna also call out that this wasn't possible to make these interactive components until pretty recently, so I'm very thankful and blessed that this is now a supported feature inside of Figma. Before, when this feature was in beta, you used to have to turn on per project file, but they enabled this by default now, and just in case, you want to make sure yours is turned on under prototype, check the enable interactive components because we're about to do some pretty cool stuff. Actually, I almost forgot, before we begin, we want this to shrink down horizontally just to make it a little bit more interesting, I suppose. Let's click into this background layer BG and make this, if you hold Alt or Option while dragging on a specific side, it will mirror that to both sides. Let's just make this 80 in width. I think works well. You can also type it in here, but it doesn't center it. So if you do that, make sure you press Option H again to center it horizontally. And I'm pretty sure we're going to want to keep this background inside of the full container that's the regular size of these other two buttons, because when it animates, it will retain that center position relative to these other two states. Cool, so now we're ready to move forward. We'll press each button and Option Command K to make them components of their own. And then we will select all three here and combine as variants. And there we go. Let's also now just take a moment to rename these. So the first one, we can keep it called default here. The second one, let's press Command R. Property 1 equals loading. And then for this final one here, Command R, property 1 equals success. This is always a good practice to get into, especially because these are variants, but really once we start prototyping these things, we're gonna see what we're changing it to, and it just makes it much more easy to understand here. So we're going to go into prototype and drag this little wire here into the loading one, and we'll say on tap, change to property loading, and it just makes a lot of sense, right? We're actually going to want to do smart animate and maybe something longer like 850. This is abnormally long for a sort of UI animation, but because we're emulating this loader to spin, we're going to want to give it some time to make sure you can actually see that spinning occur and it doesn't happen too quickly. I think we're also going to want to set ease in and out here. It just helps a little bit with this subtle animation. And then next, what we're going to want to do is drag this wire over to this one and say after delay, but we're going to put it down to 0. It'll say 1 millisecond. That's as low as you can go. We want it to be instant. Instantly change to property success. And for this one, we're going to want to do a bounce. It'll be really nice with the check icon and everything if it will ease out and back or ease in and out and back. I think ease out and back is a little bit better for that springy look here. And then for this, we'll do a more normal transition time, like 325 milliseconds. Okay, so now I just quickly threw a little, I don't know, rectangle here just to give this screen a little bit more substance, but we're ready to go. Let's drag this default state, Alt drag it, or in your assets panel, wherever you're pulling it in from, you drop it in there. And we're going to place it here just like so. I'm gonna do 64 pixels from the bottom, and then we have our padding built in, so 32 by 32 from the edges. Now, let's click on this frame, let's press play, and let the magic begin.
Magic.
The moment you've all been waiting for.
Magic.
We will tap on this button. It animates, boom, check mark, checkmate. I don't know why I just said that. Cool, well we can press R and do that as many times as we want because it is pretty cool. Like I said, it isn't the smoothest comparing to like an After Effects animation, but this totally passes for a prototype, or if you're doing some sort of user testing or anything like that. This is just super valuable, and I love that it's possible inside the great tool of Figma. Well, that was cool, right? Now you yourself have animated a sweet interactive component that indicates a system status. And hopefully you learned a little bit about smart animating and how a motion designer goes through the process of manipulating layer properties in individual states. I'm gonna try to keep thinking of these random things that I build for myself while I'm prototyping and do more videos about them. But at any point, if y'all have any specific things you want me to try to put together in a simplified approach, I am all ears. Let me know in the comments or whatever. Get a hold of me. Let's do it. Cool. Well, as always, if you got something from this video, please like and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. I just want to be here brain dumping every bit of information that is inside my head for everybody to see and learn and benefit from. I guess I've said everything I've needed to say. So I guess I've said everything I needed to say. So until next time, super nice guy out.